So inshallah, moving on from yesterday, we're gonna be looking at the gunpowder empires, the gunpowder period. So this is coming towards the end of the Islamic age now. We're coming to the. This is a period of about 200 years, 1500 to 1700, um, where we have these emergence of these three great empires in the Muslim world: Mughal, Safavid, and Ottoman. And in Europe, a lot of changes are taking place during this period. It's called the early modern period. So we have got scientific revolution. We've got the Reformation, which is the Protestant movement breaking away from the Roman Catholic Church. Remember, we were saying all of Western Europe was united under the Roman Catholic Church until this point, and so this is where you have the first break from the Roman Catholic with the Martin Luther and the Protestant movement. And you also have this is the time which is referred to as the Renaissance in Europe. Renaissance, the rediscovery of Greek and Roman um, learning, culture, and so on. So there's a lot of changes happening in Europe. So we'll be looking a bit at what's happening in Western Europe at this time as well. And then we'll be looking a bit at what's happening in the Muslim world. So if you look at the timeline, you see we're here now in the final couple of centuries of the Islamic age or the Islamic period or Islamic millennium. Now these are not this is not a terminology you will find in Western textbook, Islamic age or Islamic millennium. But this is something that I think is important because terminology and giving things names is extremely important and it's very empowering. So we need to take claim back our history. So that's why we call this the Islamic millennium. It's a very powerful it's a very powerful label, Islamic millennium. Yeah? So the gunpowder period here, and in red, that's what's happening in Europe. Yeah, Renaissance, Reformation, and discovery. Discovery is the scientific discovery, and also physical discovery, voyages of discovery across the oceans. They're discovering the Americas and things like that. Um, we're just going to focus a little bit on what's happening in Western Europe because this is a sort of a sort of a this is a time when Europe is sort of scientifically getting a bit ahead of the Muslims. Because obviously we didn't just wake up one day and we said, okay, now the Muslims have gone down, the Europeans have taken over. It's a very gradual process that takes place over probably centuries, where you have a slow decline of Muslim civilization and the rise of the Western or European civilization. So it's a very gradual process, and much of what the Western civilization, what they got from scientific and philosophical learning came from the Muslim world. Yeah. Now, for a long time, most of this was quite buried knowledge. It was hidden because the Muslims were the big enemy of Europe. Remember, even from the time of the Crusades, but even in this period, you will see the Ottomans were the big threat in Europe. The Ottomans were the big enemy to Christian Europe because in 1453 the Ottomans succeeded in taking over the Roman Empire, yeah, the final collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire with the capture of Constantinople. Um, so when the Ottomans took Constantinople and they completely took over the Eastern Roman Empire, they're moving into Eastern Europe. They've taken Greece, they've taken the Balkans, what is today's Serbia, Bosnia, these places. And the Turks are at the gates of Vienna, yeah. So this is the big thing, when in Europe, in England, when mothers want to put their kids to sleep, and the kid's not going to sleep, they say to them that the big Turk's going to come and get you. Yeah, the big Turk's going to come and get the great Turk. Like nowadays, when we put our kids to sleep, we say, "No, Jin Baba's coming to get you. Yeah, if you don't go to bed." So in Europe, they were saying the great Turk's going to come and get you. Yeah, this is how the sort of so if you're in that that's your big enemy. You're not really going to want to talk about how much you've gained from the Muslims. Yeah? How much your knowledge, European knowledge, has come from the Muslim world. But in more recent decades, this is coming out more and more, even in Western universities and academia. The amount of influence and learning that came from the Muslim world is becoming more apparent. Now, one of the things we see in Europe before the Gunpowder period, so as early back as around about 13th century, you see the first universities opening in Western Europe. Now, if you read a lot of histories of Western Europe, like that J.M. Roberts that I talked about, Penguin History of Europe, they like to boast about universities. Like universities are an amazing thing that Europeans discuss. It's something unique to Western civilizations. The university system and this stuff. Now, it's become very clear by researchers like George Makdisi and others. They've done a lot of research, and George Makdisi wrote a book called The Rise of Colleges, in which he shows very convincingly, proves that the first universities in Europe were exactly copied from the colleges of the Muslim world. Exactly copied. Not even, I mean, almost everything that the European universities had, it was taken from, because the Muslims had these big universities already, like the Qarawiyyin and the Nizamiya in Baghdad and these places. And obviously, the Europeans were getting a lot of influence from Muslims from three different places. Yeah, number one, Islamic Spain. Yeah, we haven't really talked about Islamic Spain, but very early on, the Muslims have taken Spain. The southern part of Spain has come under Muslim rule under the Umayyad time. So the very early on, what we call Andalusia, yeah, the southern part of Spain. And Spain remained under the Muslim for about a good 800 years or so. Yeah, it was under Muslim rule. And it was very advanced compared to the rest of Western Europe at that time. The learning, they had the universities. So Western Europeans were getting a lot of influence from that aspect, yeah, from Islamic Spain. And secondly, remember the Crusader kingdoms. So these Crusaders have gone into the Muslim parts of the Muslim world. For these kingdoms, they've been there for 100 years. Several generations, have grown up there in direct contact with the Muslim world. And they've got a lot of influence from them. And the third one was Sicily. Yeah, Sicily was one of the first Muslim lands to be taken by non-Muslims. So Sicily had been taken by the Muslims, I think, in the Umayyad period. But for those who are not aware, Sicily is an island near Italy, in the Mediterranean. Remember, Muawiyah, he asked Uthman, we're going to build a navy, our first navy. So they took Sicily. But Sicily was taken back from the Muslims by one of these Norman kings. And he took over Sicily, but he became very influenced by the Muslims, and he had Muslim scholars in his court, and they were learning a lot from the Muslims there. And he's a Norman, so the Normans are spread around Europe, so a lot of this influence is coming back. Anyway, so universities we know now for sure are directly inspired and copied from the great madrasas in the Muslim world. Even things like, in universities you have the chair. The professors have a chair. That came from the Muslim world, the kursi. The Shaykh would sit on the kursi where the students sat on the floor. And so many things, you know. Um, Ibn Rushd, rahimahullah, a great Muslim scholar, died 1198. He was from Andalusia, so once again Islamic Spain. And he's considered one of our great scholars even until today. Many of his books are studied in our madrasas, like Bidayatul Mujtahid and things like that. Um, so he was an Islamic scholar, faqih from the Maliki madhab and etc. But he was also greatly into falsafa, Islamic philosophy, um, and he wrote a refutation of Imam al-Ghazali's refutation of the philosophers. In the Muslim world, the Muslims really accepted Imam al-Ghazali's refutation of the philosophers. So Ibn Rushd's refutation of Imam al-Ghazali wasn't really embraced in the Muslim world, but some of his writings on fiqh and other things were embraced. But he had a massive influence in Europe. So the works of Ibn Rushd, the philosophical works of Ibn Rushd, like commentaries on Aristotle and things like that, were translated from Arabic into Latin and brought into Europe from Islamic Spain. And his teachings became so popular in Europe that there was actually a movement, an intellectual movement known as the Averroists at that time. And the Averroists is from Averroes. So Ibn Rushd is known as Averroes in Europe. And the Averroists were following this sort of rational intellectual teaching of Ibn Rushd. So his philosophy was actually more influential in Western Europe. It's just showing the early changes in Europe that were very much influenced by the Muslim world. Yeah. Because remember, the Muslims had really taken on Greek philosophy. The Muslims loved Aristotle. Even when Imam al-Ghazali wrote a refutation of the philosophers, he wasn't refuting all of philosophy. He was refuting a lot of their doctrines of the philosophers that he felt didn't agree with the revelation. But Imam al-Ghazali loved logic, for example, which came from Aristotle, and other, just the general. He used reason and rational arguments, which is very philosophical. So, even though in a way the Ghazali and other Muslims rejected philosophy, they also took what was good from Greek philosophy. So the Muslims, they loved rational debate, and they loved logic, especially Aristotelian logic, and they developed those sciences further. So this was now seeping into Western Europe as well. So by the Gunpowder period, we have the Renaissance taking place. We have the Protestant Reformation, remember. Even the Protestant Reformation, if you look at it, is quite a sort of a rational response to what they felt was superstition from the Catholic Church. So some of the main things the Protestants were protesting about was, the Roman Catholic Church does all these irrational things. Like, for example, the Catholics, they literally believe that when you go to the church and you have the wine and I can't remember what they call it, the thing, they eat this thing, and they huh? Is that bread? Maybe it's bread. So but they believe they're eating the actual body of Jesus, right? The body of Christ. It's the flesh of Christ, and the wine is the actual blood of Christ. Yeah.
They do that because before Easter on a Thursday, they believe that Jesus gave them each bread and wine because he knew that he was going to be executed on the cross. He gave them bread and wine, and then he said that this is my body and this is my blood.
Excellent. Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. Inshallah, in a few years, you'll be doing this lecture. Yeah, so I hope everyone heard that. A very good little summary there. So they literally believe, but even till today, if you go to a Roman Catholic church and you eat that thing, during that ritual, they believe it transforms into the actual blood. But so things like that, the Protestants were saying, look, this is not rational. This doesn't make sense. How can you commit lots and lots of sins and then you pay the priest and then they forgive all of your sins? Things like that they were protesting about. So I think personally the Protestant thing was quite a rational based because yeah, so it probably influenced from Islam as well. I think because remember, obviously, these Christians by that time they were worshipping a lot of images, right? Uh, Images of Jesus, Mary. All the Christians had got into very idolatrous. There'd be a lot of images and things. Even the Greek Orthodox, the Roman Catholic, and even in Constantinople, you had this movement, iconoclast movement. After Islam comes on the scene, suddenly there's a little movement within Greek Orthodox saying, no, we should get rid of all these icons, these images. This is forbidden. I'm sure they got that from the Muslims because obviously the Muslims are now reminding the Christians, look, why are you worshipping all these images and things? Anyway, so this is happening in Europe, and once you have the break from Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church is always enforcing its doctrine on everyone. Once the Protestant movement is released, start getting lots of different Protestant groups. Because basically everyone starts having their own interpretation. Once you start saying we don't need to follow the Pope and what he says is so then different preachers start coming up with their own interpretations of Christianity. So you start opening up lots of different sects of Christian sects start coming about under the umbrella of Protestantism. So, so this is what's happening. The Renaissance. The Renaissance is all about rediscovering Greek and Roman literature, learning, philosophy, things like that. So it's a little bit different. Then you have the Reformation, which is about the Protestant movement, breaking away from the Roman Catholic Church. And then you've got the scientific revolution now taking place in Europe. A lot of development of scientific learning. This is obviously linked to the Renaissance because the Greek philosophy is linked to science as well. Aristotle was, obviously one of the great philosophers that was into studying the natural world. So in a way, you can see all of the influences of these movements coming from the Muslim world, from the Muslim rationalism, because the Muslims had always embraced that very rational approach to their deen. So if you study our aqidah, our ilm al-kalam, our theology, it's very rational based. Even though a lot of the theology texts are about refuting falsafa, they're about refuting the philosophers. In fact, pretty much all of our books of kalam, theology, a lot of them is devoted to refuting the philosophers. But how are they refuting them is by rational arguments, and logical arguments. So that's, that is philosophical. So it's a type of philosophical theology. Um, so many of our theologians, they based the belief in God upon reason. They believe that the belief in the Quran should be based on a rational belief, etc. Um, However, as we said, this uncomfortable truth that we're getting everything from the Muslims was buried for a long time. So scientific revolution, we'll just quickly mention Copernicus. We don't have time to go into details, but you had people like Copernicus as symbolic of the scientific changes that are taking place in Europe. So Copernicus said, the Earth is not the center of the solar system. The sun is the center, and everything is revolved around the sun. This went against the Roman Catholic ideas that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and everything revolves around the Earth. So he was rejected by the Roman Catholic Church. After him, you had a famous scientist called Galileo. Probably people have heard of. Galileo developed this idea as well that the sun is at the center of the solar system. The Roman Catholic Church got so angry by that time because you see now these scientific beliefs are starting to challenge the Roman Catholic Church as well. So they said they basically threatened Galileo with execution unless he retracts his thing about the sun. So Galileo retracted his teaching about the sun, the Earth, the planets going around the sun. So he wasn't prepared to be shaheed for his beliefs. Not many scientists are prepared to take it to that level. Yeah. So the gunpowder period, we're looking at 1500 to about 1707. 1707 is just symbolic, as we said, to end the gunpowder period and the European age with the death of Aurangzeb, the last great Mughal emperor, and also the unification of Britain and Scotland, England and Scotland to form Great Britain for the first time happens in 1707. So we're just using that as a symbolic date to end the gunpowder period and the European and the Islamic age. Three major events happen at the beginning of this period, around the beginning of this period. Three major symbolic events. 1453 we've already talked about, so just before the beginning of the gun. Really, the gunpowder period should start with 1453 because it's such a major event, and because the walls of Constantinople are taken down by gunpowder cannon, by the biggest cannons the world has ever seen. So the Ottoman Sultan, I'm sure you know, Muhammad or Mehmet as he's known in Turkish, Mehmet, he builds some of the biggest cannons, or he builds the biggest cannons the world has ever seen. And with those cannons, he's able to breach the walls of Constantinople. The walls of Constantinople are unbreakable. This is why it's such a great symbolic event, because Constantinople literally had the greatest fortifications on earth. So for centuries, these walls have been there, and no one's ever been. Remember, Umayyads were trying, Harun Rashid was trying. Many people had tried to get into Constantinople. No one had ever succeeded breaking the walls. Now, the Crusaders at one point had managed to get into Constantinople and raid the city, but they didn't breach the walls. That they got in through some other way. But those walls were literally unbreachable. They were multi-layered walls. But because of this development of cannons, gunpowder, this is why it's called the gunpowder age, because the development of gunpowder technology completely changed the whole face of warfare. So no longer was it worth having castles with walls. It was basically obsolete. There was no longer any point in having these heavy armored knights. Once you've got gunpowder weapons, that has got no effect. So a lot of the military technology was basically overnight became not overnight, but it very quickly became obsolete with the development of gunpowder weapons. And this is also helps us explain why we see in this period the re-emergence of very large empires. Yeah. So remember, in the early age, we had the Umayyad and Abbasid, very large empires. Then we had a very long middle period where there were a lot of smaller entities. But in this period, we see the emergence of large empires again in the Muslim world, and we can understand that because of the gunpowder weapons. Because these weapons, you need a lot of money and resources to create these weapons. Yeah. So that's why it favors larger big kings and big emperors. They've got the resources and the money to make these weapons, and once they have these weapons, no one can really face them. They can't really. So this is also an age where we see the decline of one of those great patterns that we looked at before, which was the threat of the nomadic and barbarian people upon the civilized people. With the development of gunpowder weapons, the Bedouins and the nomads, they really also go off the scene. Yeah, it takes some time for this, but they also cannot now fight, even though they remember because it was their physical toughness. But physical toughness doesn't mean anything now because you've got a different type of warfare. Yeah, uh, when you're in front of a cannon, it doesn't matter how physically tough you are or how good your horses are, you're just going to get blown away. So this really does revolutionize and change the sort of history of world events. So really, 1453 should be the beginning of the gunpowder period because Mehmet he gets down the now, but Muhammad al-Fatih, Mehmet the conqueror, he's using a Hungarian engineer to build the cannons. Yeah, so he's using a Hungarian, Western European Christian to build the cannons. So it also shows us that already the European world is edging ahead in terms of science and technology of the Muslim world. Yeah. But what the Muslims are doing is as soon as these technological advancements are taking place, the Muslims are able to take them on and stay ahead because they've still got more resources, more money, and things like that. In 1492, we have the fall of the Islamic Spain. So the beginning of the Gunpowder Age is also the end of Islamic Spain. So the Muslims have been in Spain for about 800 years. So it's a very sort of a tragic moment in 1492 when the very last Muslim kingdom of Granada is taken by the Christians in Spain. And in the same year, 1492, you have this sort of iconic discovery of America by Christopher Columbus. Now, Christopher Columbus, he was trying to find India, right? He was trying to get to India because what was happening basically in Western Europe at that time, because you had the Ottomans coming in the east and dominating the Mediterranean, Western Europeans were basically blocked off from the trade routes to the east and through the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean had become an Ottoman lake. So Western Europeans, if they couldn't do their trade and things through Ottoman lands because this is your big enemy. And even if you did want to go through there, you'd probably have to pay a lot of taxes and tributes, yeah, because you're the enemy. So Western Europeans are now trying to find trade routes to the Far East. They want to get to India, they want to get to China, they want to get to the Spice Islands. The Spice Islands are what we call today Indonesia, Malaysia, right? The Spice Islands, why they're called Spice Islands? Because they had certain spices that grew there that were not found anywhere else in the world. Things like nutmeg and some other spices, I'm not sure what they are. It seems a bit bizarre nowadays, like to even think why they're so obsessed with these spices, but it was a very it was a very valuable commodity in those days. You couldn't get them anywhere else. So it was actually worth going halfway around the world, actually the whole way around the world, to get these, bring them back to Europe. You could make a lot of money by selling these things. They're like gold basically, more valuable than gold. Um, so the Western Europeans, they're looking around. We can't go to the east because the Ottomans are basically blocked off the whole air region. Let's try and find. Let's see if we can go around the Atlantic Ocean and try to get to India. To do that, we'll have to go around the whole of Africa. They have to go around the whole of Africa. I don't have a map right now, but if you imagine from Western Europe, you have to go around the whole of Africa, and then you go through the Arabian Sea, and then you get to India. Yeah. And then after India, you've got the Spice Islands and you've got China. So all of those areas where there's a lot of trade to be done. The Europeans, they love trading, right? They want to make money. This is the earliest stirrings of capitalism. Some historians that look at the history of capitalism, they often take it back to around about this time. Yeah, where we just want to make money, money, money. What is capitalism? The desire to make endless amounts of money. Yeah, and so Christopher Columbus. I mean, the Portuguese are the first ones. The Portuguese are the first Europeans to start finding some of these routes around Africa to the Far East. Yeah, so the Portuguese is the first colonial empire, really. So the Spanish are also trying to find, because they're keeping it a closely guarded secret, the Portuguese. They're not telling everyone, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll tell you how to get there. We found a way. So they're not telling anyone, but the Spanish, they want to find the route as well. So Christopher Columbus sets off across the Atlantic to try to go around Africa to get to India. But instead of going that way, he ends up going across the Atlantic and landing in what is today Central America, the Caribbean region. But he believes that he's in India, right? So that's why until today they're called Indians, right? The Native Americans are called Indians or Red Indians sometimes. And it's because even until he died, Christopher, even though many people told him, no, it's definitely not India, and other voyages started coming, to this new land. But until the day he died, he still insisted, no, it's India. It definitely was India. I'm sure it was India. So he was a bit of a nutcase, really, I think. Um, he couldn't take it, I went the total wrong way and about 1,000 miles off route. Yeah? But what happened was, inadvertently, he had found this new land, which Europeans was now open to European colonization and exploitation. So the Spanish got there first, right? So the Spanish, they started settling in central, what is today like Mexico, Caribbean, and South America. And what they found there was huge, huge amounts of silver, right? This land was filled with just silver and gold as well, but a lot of silver. And they basically went a bit crazy. So they start sending their ships, they're saying, send people, there's so much silver here. So there was ships going across from Spain. But how do we get, so they had to they start getting the natives to start mining the silver. The natives are, I don't know if you've probably seen the picture, so the Native American people, so both South and North, they didn't have the advanced technology now that you find in Europe and Asia and in the Muslim world. Because these land, the American the two continents of America, have been split away from the Eurasian, Afro-Eurasian world. For thousands of years, no one's been there. So they've got their own civilization, their own technology, but they don't have anything like what Europeans and the rest of the world have got. So as soon as the Europeans come on there with their, gunpowder weapons and their horses and things like that, they've never seen horses before. So the horse was introduced to the Americas by the Spanish. So the Spanish are able to very quickly dominate those native people. If you see pictures of them, often these natives are like, they're not even dressed, they don't have much clothing. They're quite what we call primitive, right? But these Native Americans have lived there for thousands and thousands of years. They think now, minimum at least 20,000 years. The Native Americans lived in those lands. Yeah, at least 20,000. It could be a lot longer. The Australian Aborigines, they lived in Australia for at least 60,000 years. So it's very, very. We're talking about, this is the people are. This is their land. You can dispute other lands, like who got there first or whatever, but no one can ever dispute that these people is not their land. They were there from the beginning, as far as we know. Um, but the Europeans, they devastate these lands. They completely destroyed the natives. A lot of the natives in the Spanish world, they die off very quickly. Part of it is just from smallpox, because they're being exposed to germs that they don't have any immunity to, that germs that are being brought from these European travelers. The natives have no immunity, so they all start dying off, from smallpox and things like that. Um, on some occasions, this was actually intentionally brought over once the Europeans realized It's a quick way to kill off some of these natives. They were using it as biological warfare later on as well. But also, they just don't have the weapons and the technology to fight against these European invaders. Um, so this is the picture of Europe and the Muslim world at the time. The six these six men lived at the same time. So just by one of those, you might recognize some of their names. These are six great leaders of their people. They're all contemporary to one another. And it just helps you anchor your history because you probably heard of Henry VIII, right? In your school. So Henry VIII is King of England at the same time as Francis I of France, Charles V of Spain. So this is when Spain is going through its golden age because of its colonization of South America. Spain is actually the leading power in Western Europe at this time, and it's the Spanish golden age. Yeah, and you have Suleiman. Yeah, so the Ottoman Sultan at that time is Suleiman. He's known in the West as Suleiman the Magnificent because the Western Europeans are in awe of the Ottoman power in this time, you know. Amongst the Ottomans, he's known as Suleiman al-Qanuni, Suleiman the lawgiver. In other, because the Ottomans are very obsessed with law and order and due process. I think now we probably know. I mean, it's coming out. You know that they were very bureaucratic. You know, they're probably the first bureaucracy, the Ottomans, and the Western Europeans got that from the Ottomans. The Western Europeans got so much from the Ottomans, and it's all buried at the moment. You know, it's not really come out because it doesn't suit, especially now with Turkey with what's his name Erdogan. It doesn't suit Western academics or Western people to highlight how much we've actually got from the Ottomans and from Turkey, right? No one's, it's not in anyone's interest to be highlighting this history. But the Ottomans, you know, they were very bureaucratic. Everything was done by due process, the law and order. You know, they very much believed in law and justice. You know, you have to sign the right papers to get the right things done. This is what now is a hallmark of Britain and other you know, in European places. The British definitely took on that, you know, later on. And then further to the east, we've got the Shah Ismail, who's the Safavid Sultan of Persia, and you've got Babur, who's the first Mughal emperor of India. So at this point, 1500, you've got these six men that are sort of very significant historical figures. Yeah. This is a map of the world. So if you can see the highlighter here, this is Europe here. It's probably can't you can't read it obviously, but you can see Europe here. And this is what we were talking about. You know, so Western Europeans, they're trying to now go around the Atlantic here. They can no longer go east because the Ottomans are controlling the Mediterranean. They're controlling the Eastern Europe. So these Western, you know, so Spain is, you know, they're trying to get around Africa to get to India here and China and the Spice Islands, right? So it's a long voyage. Anyone know how long that voyage would take by ship to go all the way around Africa to east? Have a guess, anyone? No, much longer. Longer even than 6 months. 1 year, yeah, approximately 1 year. So it take 1 year to get there. Normally the ships would stay there for 1 year to do their trading and buying and selling, and then 1 year journey back. So the round trip is 3 years. Yes, yeah, so it's a long trip, and this is why these Western European they start forming these companies. They call them companies, like the East India Company. So everyone can put their money together to send out these expeditions. They were a big deal. And also it meant that not one person has to risk all their wealth. Well, let's pool our wealth together. Because they were very risky, you know, 3 year expedition. A lot of those ships might never make it back, yeah? And this is why they actually came up with the idea of limited companies for the first time in Europe as well. limited liability company, so people can put their money without the massive risk. So this is where Columbus, he's trying to go around here, but he ends up here. Yeah, he just takes a wrong turning somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean here. He dies believing that he still found India, right? So this is what's happening. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
at that time, did they take slaves with them? Like, did they go past Africa and like land there and take slaves?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we were going to talk about that a bit later, but yeah, there were slaves in those days, so slavery was quite common around the whole world in those days. Um, the slave trade started a little bit later. Yeah, so around about this period, they started getting slaves from Africa as well and taking them over to America, and we're going to talk about that soon, inshallah. According to Francis Bacon, three inventions changed the world. We talked about gunpowder already. The printing press in Europe transformed the spread of knowledge in Europe, and the compass. This is what allowed them to start sailing around the Atlantic Ocean. This is where you see the Spanish here, and you see the Native Americans, the Indians, right? You can see they're very sort of primitive. They don't have even clothing. It's interesting. The Quran describes a certain type of people. When Dhul-Qarnayn, when he was in his travels, he came to a people. Lam naj'alahum min duniha sitra. There were certain people that he came across that Allah has made no clothing from the sun. He made them no cover from the sun. And that's what the tafsir say. They didn't have clothing. So it's interesting how these, and even the Australian Aboriginals, if you see them, when they first discovered them, they didn't have clothing, just obviously just covering their private parts and things, but they were basically uncovered people. And what did Dhul-Qarnayn do? He left them in peace. Yeah, that's one interpretation. Kadhalika. It just says in the Quran, kadhalika. Just like that. It doesn't really explain, but according to one interpretation, it means that he just left these people in peace. Why? Because these people are a type of people that live like in harmony with nature. They live in harmony with nature. They lived on that land for thousands and thousands of years. They live in harmony with the animals, and they're very respectful of nature. If you look at the Native American, even the Aboriginal people, they have names for the trees. Every tree, they know the name of every tree, and things like that. Yeah.
Isn't it that when he met the people, they said they Jews and Jews with them?
That was the third people. Yeah, so the Quran, there's three people he meets. First one, and then these are the second one, and third one are the Yajuj and Majuj one. Yeah. So this is, if you look throughout Islamic history as well, you don't ever see, in my opinion, yeah, you don't see any instant of Muslims invading lands where you have these type of sort of, you can call them. I don't like to use the term Aboriginal because this was a term that was used by Europeans to make them look primitive, and that was justified why we should take over their land. Oh, they're primitive, they're backward. We're bringing progress, so we should take over their land. They don't really deserve to be on their land. And different justifications were used by Europeans to basically wipe out these people. And I don't think in it you'll see any incident of that in Muslim history, where Muslims ever did anything similar to these type of native people, that live on the land. The Native Americans, when eventually, as the story goes later, when we go into the European age, Britain comes on the scene, they start colonizing North America. There was a massive, horrific massacre of the Native Americans in North America. If you look at America now, you think it's a white country, it's a white man's country, right? But 200-300 years ago, there were Indian people there, and the white people have completely wiped them out. And same with Australia. Yeah? You think of it as a white country, Anglo-Saxon country. But this is quite recent, 18th, 19th century is when the thing accelerated. Especially in the 19th century, it became a massive flood of white people going to settle in those places. But the way they treated the natives was horrific and has been described as genocide. There's a book by a guy called Lindsay, I mentioned it in a previous, who wrote a book called Murder State, and how the west of America, and California was taken by a genocide of the Native Americans. And so this is a horrific history they have. And don't forget, this is not these are we're talking about big continents here, continents. We're not talking about country. Yeah, you're not invading a country even. You're wiping out people from a whole continent. Yeah? North America we're talking about, South America. These are continents. These are very, very huge parts of the world. They say now they estimate there was like hundreds, maybe 500 Native American nations in North America alone. There's a really good documentary film by Kevin Costner is the narrator, and I think it's called 500 Nations or something. It's I can share the link later on, where they give a very honest account of actually what happened, because most of it is still very not very clear, because the Americans are the superpower today. The Americans are the big, so they've got the propaganda, they've got the history on their side. They write the history. So until today, the picture is very, very distorted about what they done in North America to the natives. You know, this is what they done in South America, the Spanish. So the British basically took North America. They fought with France for a while, but the British took North America. But the Spanish took the South. The Spanish got there first, and they took South America. This is why most of South America and Mexico, etc., is all Spanish speaking till today. So they were getting the natives and forcing them to mine the silver mines, yeah? Now most of the natives, they died very quickly because these are people that live free in the land, They're people that live with nature. They're not, they can't really, their physical bodies, literally, they couldn't tolerate this type of enforced labor in the mines and things like that. So if you look at the statistics, they're horrible. Like in somewhere like Mexico, about 90% of all of the natives were dead within 80 years of the Spanish rule. Yeah, so the natives, they couldn't tolerate this type of enslaved work. They call it, I can't remember what they call it, but it's sort of like an enslaved labor. Yeah. Now, so this is why then they had a problem. All the natives are dying. We've got no one to work on the mines. And also we've got no one to work on the plantations, because now the Europeans are coming. They're setting up these huge plantations. And these plantations are not for normal farming. Normal farming is generally we want to feed ourselves, our families, and we sell the surplus to the nearby towns and villages. These plantations are not about farming for livelihood. These are plantations that are about making money. So they're all focused on making money, the quickest and best money we can make. So they call them cash crops. Yeah, which are the crops we can grow to make the most profit. So this is the beginning of capitalism. They're obsessed with making money. Yeah. So what are the crops that make the most money? Cotton, coffee, tobacco, yeah, things like that. So they're getting these big, massive plantations now, and they're just growing all cotton, coffee. But the problem is, who's going to work on these massive plantations? The natives are all dying. So this is where what you were saying comes in. Yeah, this is where they said we need to start getting some slaves from Africa. Yeah, we're going to bring the black slaves from Africa and bring them over to Americas to work on the plantations, because we haven't got any natives left. They're all died off. Poor Europeans have got no workers left on their fields. So let's go to Africa. We just grab a few of the black people from Africa, bring them over, and then we've got a good supply of workers. Yeah. And thus began the largest and most cruel forced migration of people in history that we know of. The largest and most cruel forced migration of people in history. So over a few centuries, about 30 million is estimated, about 30 million black Africans were brought over as slaves to work in the American plantations. It was a horrific slavery as well. It wasn't in any way, the conditions that they were made to endure. Uh, they were forced to leave their own religions and beliefs and forced to become Christians once they arrived. So many of them, in time, they even forgot their roots. There was a very emotional journey that this guy Alex Haley went. He's the biographer of Malcolm X, and he done some research. He wanted to trace his roots, and then he wrote a book called Roots, and they've made a few films and TV series out of it as well. Where he basically, because they had forgotten, the black people in America, they don't know, where we. That's why Malcolm put his name X. It means I don't know. We don't know who our forefathers are. These guys have ripped us from our, people. So Alex Haley, he actually traced back meticulously his parent, grandparent, all the way back to the first person that was brought from Africa. And that person actually turned out to be a Muslim. Kunta Kinte. Kunta Kinte turned out to be a Muslim. And Alex Haley actually went back to Africa, to the village where he was taken from. And it was very emotional because there were some elders in the village that still remembered because people in villages, sometimes they have this thing of keeping lineages, memorizing lineages. So they were able to tell him, his descent of his great 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 grandfather. Yeah, good question. I mean, our theologians discuss these issues, about, for example, if there's people that the message has never reached them, if no prophet or messenger has reached them, according to our theologians, there's two main opinions. One is that they're not responsible for even believing in one God. And the other opinion is that they should still have to believe in one God, but they don't have to follow any rules of halal and haram, because obviously they haven't received any guidance. But according to some of the theologians, just having an intellect is enough to believe that there's one God. And it's enough to... but I think that was a sort of weaker opinion, to be honest. But we don't know. They may have had messengers coming to them as well, and prophets during those thousands of years. So that's the other thing. One of the interesting thing, I don't know if, well, obviously you must have heard of Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer who died a few years ago. If some of you might remember, when Muhammad Ali died, he had this funeral thing, which was chaired by Imam Zaid Shakir. And the Muhammad Ali, he had organized exactly what's going to happen in his funeral before he died. So who the speakers are going to be, he wanted Imam Zaid to chair the thing, and who the different people are going to be, etc. So one of the people that was invited, if some of you might even remember, they were Native American chiefs, two Native American chiefs. So the Native American, they still survive. In North America, they're still second-class citizens even till today. But that's another story. But so two of their chiefs came, and they did a little speech, on about Muhammad Ali's death. And one interesting thing, one of them, they said, look, they said, your Allah and our Creator is one. So these Native Americans, they believed in a one Creator. So it said, your Allah and our Creator is the same, is God. So many of these people do believe in a one God or one Creator. The other question is, was there equivalent of United Nations in the Muslim world in the 1500s? As far as I know, there was no concept of that type of thing in the Muslim world. But as we said, there was a type of common culture, a common understanding of Sharia, Sunnism, etc. Common authorities, in that sense. But as far as I know, there was no point where these separate Muslim, entities tried to make some sort of... because it wasn't that type of world. It wasn't a world of instantaneous communication. Remember, the first instant communication comes about with the telegraph under the British Empire. Yeah? So we're talking about probably 1800, 1800 or so. Before the telegraph, no one could communicate. The fastest communication, does anyone know what was the fastest communication?
Was it like the small birds that fly?
Birds, yeah, exactly. Pigeon, yeah. Messenger pigeon was the fastest way to communicate in those ancient times. And also, obviously, horses and things like that, yeah. It's quite interesting. Ibn Battuta, when he went to India, he described, he said they had an amazing messenger system. The Muslim ruler of India, it was before the Mughal time, this is the Muslims, some other Muslim dynasty. But he said they had the most amazing messenger system in India. Um, all of those roads would come to the headquarters where the Sultan or whatever he was, you know. But they had roads going to each part of the empire. And along the road, you had basically every mile, you had 3 stops, I think, 3 stops every mile. And throughout the entire length of the road, which went for miles and miles and miles stretching across the empire, you had these, every third of a mile, you had a stop. And what you had runners, fast runners. Not horses, but human beings. And so he said, if the Sultan, if he wants to send a message to anywhere in the empire, or if he wants to get something, the fastest way was that system. The message is given to the first guy, and he sprints as fast as he can to the next stop, like about a third of a mile. And then he hands it to the next guy, and he sprints as fast as he can to the next one, and so on in the chain. And he said it's amazing. He said it's faster than the horse, the message by horse. Um, but obviously a lot of the messages were done by horses in a similar manner. You have a certain stops, hand it to the next guy, then the horse would start galloping to the next one, etc. So they had different, but it was a different world. So if you've got the Mughal, the Ottomans, there's not much, communication. It's not a globalized world like we have today. So I think it was very, very different world they lived in. So they wouldn't have even, thought of anything like that. Any other questions before we carry on? Yes.
Just Columbus, 1492. There's some evidence somewhere I've read or heard that the Muslims were in America before him doing dawah. So some of the Red Indians had turbans and things. There was some Arabic on the walls. So couldn't the Muslims have taken him there, or from Spain when the Inquisition time?
Yeah, these are good points. I think there's some research being done, like you said. I'm not at the forefront. I'm not aware of it myself, so I can't really comment. But I know people have been talking about this and trying to do some research. So I can't really comment on it. I don't really know much about that. Yeah.
Where was Christopher Columbus from? Like before?
Spain.
Oh.
You're Spanish, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's the things that need to be researched further, I think.
So why does America speak English then?
So the Spanish took South America. Yeah. So because that was actually more, the climate was better and things like that. So it's only the British went to North America. Spanish had already taken South America. So North America was more difficult. So we're going to skip the 30 Years' War, yeah? So we'll look a bit what's happening in the Muslim world now as well. So just to sum it up, in the European world, this is Reformation, Renaissance, discovery, and it's the Spanish Golden Age. The Spanish Empire is at its height. The other Western European powers are Portugal, Netherlands, France, and Britain, at that time England, because Britain isn't united yet. These powers are trying to catch up with the Spanish. They're also trying to go across the Atlantic, but the Spanish have got there first, so they've got the bulk of that land. So a lot of what the English and the French are doing, they're raiding the Spanish ships. So the Spanish ships are coming full of silver, like literally ships full of silver. The English, the French, and these others, they're trying to raid them and trying to grab the silver, and so on. So this is what's happening in Europe at that time. What's happening in the Muslim world? So, as we said, these three great empires are emerging. You can see here the Ottomans, very disciplined. Look at their armies, very disciplined, yeah? And I'm sure 100%, in my opinion, this is where the Europeans have got all these modern armies, with the marching and information and the drums. The Turks were doing that before. And there were Western Europeans there watching this, and they were reporting back to it, back to England, back to France. Yeah? These are what the Turks are doing. I think this is the Safavid, pick a picture of the Safavid court. And this is the Mughal in India. Obviously, you've got the elephants, yeah, in India. And I think that's the Red Fort, isn't it, in Delhi? Delhi is the capital of the Mughals, right? Um, Obviously, the Muslim rulers, they're not living Islamically perfect lives. We never claimed that, right? Throughout the history, after the Khulafa Rashidun, the leaders are not perfect, pious Muslims. But remember, history is not just about what the rulers are doing as well. History of a whole civilization. So there's many um, other stories here as well. But what one thing that all of these do have in common is they believe in Islam, right? Even if they don't practice Islam to the highest point. It was like what Sheikh Hamza said once, like someone was saying, oh, you're talking about the Abbasids and all that, about all of their corruption. But he said, I would give an arm and a leg to have one of these Abbasid rulers today. Because they believe in Islam, right? They have no question about that. They believe in the Quran. The Quran is the highest authority in any of these Muslim empires and Muslim lands. No one, no sultan, no khalifa, no emir, no khan can ever challenge the authority of the Quran. This is a fact. And as we shall see in this later period with the Ottomans and the Mughals, they have quite a religious culture as well. This is when the Sufi brotherhoods have come on the scene, the Sufi tariqas. They come about around about after the Mongolian invasions. Yeah, that's when we have the rise of the Sufi tariqas or brotherhoods. Sufism is there from much before. But as this new phenomenon of tariqas, which is like Sufi brotherhoods, where people pledge allegiance to a particular sheikh or the head of that tariqah, these became pervasive throughout the Muslim world. And the Ottomans, they fully embraced the Sufi tariqas. The Mughals, they loved the Sufi sheikhs and things like that. And it became part of the whole society, from rich to poor. Now, once again, this is a theory that I don't know if anyone has come up with this or researched into this, but this is my theory that I don't think it's any coincidence that the Sufi tariqas come about just when the Mongolian invasions take place, after the Mongolian invasions. Because for the first time, a large part of the Muslim world is now under non-Muslim rules. Yeah, so there's no one to pledge your allegiance. Yeah, you've got large parts of the Muslim world now under non-Muslim rule. Suddenly you have these tariqas emerging where people are pledging allegiance to a sheikh. So I've got a feeling, this is just a theory, I mean, it might be totally wrong, but the two things might be linked, the absence of Muslim rule and authority. Now Muslims as communities are coming together under these individuals that they can pledge allegiance to, because you can't pledge allegiance to the Mongol who's a non-Muslim. Right? But anyway, that's just a theory. So this is what happens. Sufism is there from centuries back before, from the earliest times, There's people like Al-Junaid al-Baghdadi, Imam al-Ghazali, many others, from the early period that have written on this subject. But in this period now we have these sort of tariqas, the Naqshbandiya, the Chishtiya, famous that you've probably heard of, Qadiriya, etc. and they become a very big phenomenon. So among the, this is just one of the Safavid soldiers, just showing one of the cannons. So remember, we're in the gunpowder period here. Um, Now during this period, up to 1707 at least, the Muslim empires are far more stronger militarily and economically than these beginning of these European colonial kingdoms, right? I mean, by far. So the Europeans can't even imagine challenging any of the Muslim empires at this time. Um, there's a story of some of these Europeans. They were finding India. So there's a picture, or there's a, they had to do sajda in front of Aurangzeb because they had done something wrong. Anyway, they wanted to ask his forgiveness, and there's a picture of them prostrating in front of him, and he's forgiving them. Anyway, so Aurangzeb, we haven't got time to talk about the Mughals, obviously, which is a shame because many of us are from India, Pakistan background. But through lack of time, we're going to look more at the Ottomans today. But just to mention, the Mughals are. Aurangzeb is the last great Mughal emperor, and he has a long reign of about 20 years. And under him, India is the largest it's ever been united under one person. So really, the Mughals actually are the ones who actually invented the concept of India as a united place. And there's a lot of negative propaganda about Aurangzeb, especially nowadays with the Hindu nationalist movement and everything. There's a lot of negative propaganda against Aurangzeb. But if some of you can attend when we do the full history course, we have a Shaykh Jawad. He comes to teach about the Mughal, and he's done quite a bit of research into Aurangzeb, and there's a lot of it is very it's a distorted history of his how he's made out to be as a fanatic, religious fanatic. There were more Hindu mansabdars, they were called mansabdars, people of high government positions in the Mughal court. They were mansabdar, they mean they are very high up in the Muslim government. There were more Hindu mansabdars in Aurangzeb than there were in Akbar time, in terms of percentage. So he was not someone who was against the Hindus or things like that, or oppressing other religions. Yeah. What he did do, he brought back the jizya, because he was more of a pious ruler than some of the other Mughal rulers. He didn't wear all of the jewelry, and he was more sort of strict on Islam. And obviously, one of the things in Sharia is we have to have jizya from non-Muslims. So he brought that back, and they keep going on about how bad is the jizya, is so bad. What they never tell you but Muslims pay zakat. Yeah, Muslims pay a tax called zakat. Non-Muslims don't have to pay zakat in the Muslim world. They pay jizya, so it's generally less than what the Muslims have to pay. Anyway, so this is where we need our Muslim historians. Once again. There are some Western academics that have written very good stuff about Aurangzeb, and once again, I can share the reference if people want. But anyway, looking at the Ottomans, yeah, just want to look a bit about the Ottomans for the last section. The Ottoman army, like we said, was a very organized, a very disciplined army. So you had some Western Europeans writing, back to England. If you see, when the Sultan comes out, there's 1,000 people, but there's absolute silence. You can hear a pin drop. That was the sort of discipline of the army, right? And the army was composed of these 4 different sections. The Janissaries, the Sipahis, the Akinji, and the Mehtaran. The Janissaries were the elite troops of the Ottomans. They were considered to be personally connected to the Sultan. The Janissaries were trained from a young age in martial arts, and also they received a very high level education. So they were learned people, but they were taught all of the obviously military skills, and they were foot, they were infantry, but they were the elite troops, and they were very intensely loyal to the Sultan. They were often taken from some of the regions of um, what is today called the Balkans, yeah, from Christian lands. And this is something that the people always criticize the Ottomans about. I don't know, they were kidnapping the Christian boys and making them into these fanatic troops loyal to the Sultan. The truth is, I mean, whether people like it or not, many of those kids that were taken, their parents were ecstatically happy because they're poor Christian peasants, farmers, and their son is now going to go and become one of the top people in this whole empire. Because the Janissaries were very high status within the Ottoman Empire. But anyway, the criticism is that they were probably forced to convert to Islam. I don't know the truth of that or not. Like I said, I mean, we're not saying that the Muslims were perfect or the Ottomans were perfect or anything like that. And many bad things were done, by all people. But the Janissaries were. So then you have the Sipahis. The Sipahi were basically cavalry, and these were the sort of landlords from around the empire, right? So each Sipahi, he has land somewhere around the Ottoman Empire, and when the Sultan wants to do a big jihad, he will call them, and they will come. So they're normally landlords, and they have obviously they come on their horses, and they were called Sipahis. And there were some Sipahis, cavalry, that were part of the actual Ottoman. They stayed in this, they were professionals. But most of the Sipahis were land-owning people from around the empire. Um, and that made up the bulk of the army, the Sipahis. In a way, I mean, it's like similar to the feudal system in the sense that they've got their fiefs where they collect the taxes. But it's different to the feudal system in Europe because the people who live on that land, the peasants, they're not serfs. They're free men and women, but they pay the taxes to the lord, the Sipahi. And then you have the Akinji. The Akinji was the part of the army that was made up of basically volunteers and enthusiastic people from around. So when the Sultan is called for jihad, you get a lot of Muslims that want to take part in jihad. They're not like professional soldiers, but they just, they've got weapons. People knew how to fight and defend themselves in those days, yeah? And they want to get the reward for fighting jihad. So these Akinji are these type of, they call them the irregular forces. And they were often sent as the vanguard in front of the army because they were really enthusiastic. They want to get the reward, they want to be shaheed, things like that. So they were often sent at the front to face the army first. And sometimes they would defeat the other army, so the actual bulk of the army doesn't even get involved. And then the Mehtaran is the band, the military band. And once again, someone needs to do this research, It's in European armies now until today, that's what they're famous for, the military band, right? And they're marching along with the band. This is all from the Ottomans. Okay, so this is a picture of the Mehtaran, the band, the military band. It says in the thing there, thought to be the oldest variety of military marching bands in the world. Come on, where did the Europeans get these military bands from? It's obvious connection there. Someone needs to do this research, maybe do a PhD on it or whatever, because then the Westerners aren't going to come and start saying, oh, we got all this from the Turks. Erdogan is number one Satan at the moment, right? We don't want to give our heritage from the Turks, right? This is the Ottoman Empire at the height. As you can see, this is Constantinople, yeah, the capital. And then you've got a large part of Eastern Europe and Greece is under Ottoman. Yeah, a lot of people forget Greece was a Muslim country for several centuries, yeah. Then you've got obviously Turkey, a large part of some parts of Iraq even were taken at the Ottomans at times. Now, obviously, the Ottomans have got the Hijaz, Makkah and Medina, so that obviously gave them a lot of prestige in the Muslim world, and that's why eventually they were able to take the title of Khalifa. I can't remember exactly which Ottoman Sultan first did that, but they took the title of Khalifa because they've got Makkah and Medina, and then they have obviously a lot of North Africa, including Egypt, the breadbasket of the world, and the Mediterranean is an Ottoman lake, right? If you look at that map and then you look at the map of the Roman Empire, you'll see it's pretty much identical. Yeah, the Ottoman Empire and the Roman Empire, these are very identical. So the Ottomans in many ways are the true inheritors of the Romans, right? Remember Suleiman al-Qawluni. What are the Romans famous for in the sort of the positive image? The Romans, they brought law and order. You know, they had law, the rule of law. And that's why the British and the Americans now, they pride themselves on having the rule of law. We've got the Roman tradition, right? But the true, so many people have claimed to be inheritors of Rome. It's interesting. Many people claim to be the inheritors of the Romans. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, there's a surah called Ar-Rum, right? The Romans. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ. The Romans have been defeated. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. After their defeat, they will be victorious. And on that day, the believers will celebrate. On that day, the believers will celebrate when the Romans are victorious. Interesting. Obviously, we know the context for that at the time because the Muslims in Mecca, they identified with the people of the book, right? And the Persians, they were fire worshippers, idol worshippers. But it's just interesting because the Quran is an eternal book. You know, even though it's revealed for certain things, it's an eternal book. The meaning is eternal. So it's just interesting that Allah has put victory of the Romans with the happiness of the believers. Now, many claim to be inheritors of Rome. If you look at the Russians claim to be inheritors. The Russians are Greek Orthodox. Remember, Constantinople was Greek Orthodox. When the Ottomans took Constantinople, the Russians, they maintained the Greek Orthodox Church and the teachings. So they claim that we're the inheritors of the Romans, right? And they've got probably more claim than the West have, to be honest, because they did have the Greek Orthodox tradition. And so that's why the Russian ruler was called the Tsar. Tsar is actually from Caesar. Yeah? Tsar is a derivation of Caesar. Now in the West, they had already been claiming to have inherited from Rome as well. So you have the Holy Roman Empire. And you have, when Germany eventually became united in the 19th century, what did they call the leader of the Germans? Kaiser, which is also the German for Caesar, Kaiser. All right, so many claim to carry the heritage of Rome, including today the Americans with the Senate and all these things, right? And the eagle. But you could argue, someone could argue that actually the Ottomans were the true inheritors of Rome. Yeah, look at their empire. And the Ottomans themselves had a very strong feeling about this. You know, they were very proud of the fact that they had Constantinople. They made it their capital, you know. And they were very proud of the fact that they had inherited the Roman Empire, the Romans. So they saw themselves as inheritors of the Roman Empire. So just a point of reflection, really. So we've talked about how you've got the Sunni internationalism, the Sunni orthodoxy, right? With the Ottomans, obviously the Hanafi school is the main Sharia. but they also recognized the others like the Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. By this stage of Islamic history, there's a very broad understanding of Sunnism that we respect all four madhabs, and we don't say that one is better than another, but we choose one or another to follow. So the Ottomans had the Hanafi school, the Mughal were Hanafi, the Abbasids were Hanafi school. The Hanafi school was the biggest school of law in the Sunni world throughout history. And then we have the Sufi brotherhoods, as we talked about. So the Janissaries, they are linked to a Sufi brotherhood. In the Ottoman society, the Sufi tariqas are very much institutionalized with the government. So even the Janissaries, they're part of a Sufi brotherhood. Even the guilds that we're going to talk about, the guilds. So the Ottomans had these every profession had a guild. So if you're a tailor, you belong to the guild of tailors. If you're a doctor, you belong to a guild of doctors. If you're a goldsmith, you belong to a guild of goldsmiths, etc. Every profession has a guild. And these guilds were organized in a formal way. And they were also responsible for professional qualification in a way, So it was also a way of regulating the profession. Only qualified people can become part of the guild, and they were then responsible for also collecting the taxes to pay to the Ottoman Sultan. But each guild was linked to a particular Sufi tariqa as well. The interesting thing about the Muslim world throughout this history is that there's no such thing as employees. Yeah? If you're part of a guild, you're an independent professional. If you're a tailor, if you're a whatever you are, generally speaking, before modern times, before industrial society, even in the West, people considered it to be a very, very low thing to be a salaried employee of someone. It was considered a very low status. Only the really desperate poor people in society would work for someone for a wage. It's interesting because now this is the norm, right? After industrialization and the coming of large companies and corporations, nearly all of us now probably work for a boss and work for a wage. In pre-modern, pre-industrial societies, this was considered very demeaning, not good for the dignity of a human being. So, and even when this was why in the early days in Western history, when you had these big big factories and things like that, there was a lot of resistance to these, bossing you around, telling you what to do. Now we've gone to such an extreme point where this has just become terrible situation now, where people have no job security or anything. The boss can basically do anything. The corporation can do anything. You're working there for years. One day they say you're sacked. You got 1 hour to leave the building. We all heard these stories, yeah. So that's the guilds, right? And then we just want to talk a little bit about what life was like. As I promised the other day, we're going to talk a bit about what life was like for the normal person, yeah? So let's talk about that for the last 10 minutes or so. What was life like for the ordinary person living, say, in the Ottoman Empire? But you can extend this to other Muslim empires. They're all very similar, right? The people who lived in the Ottoman Empire, they were basically free. So we didn't have serfdom that you had in Western Europe at this time. Yeah, there's no such thing as a serf. Either you're a free person, you live on you peasant, you work your land, you pay your taxes, or you're a hired laborer, like we said, but that was considered a very, only the people who were very, very poor would do that. Now here I'm quoting from a Western historian, André Clos, who's a French guy who wrote, who's got a book on Suleiman. And in that book, I've quoted a lot of things from him, because once again, people might think, oh, I'm just a Muslim, I'm just trying to be biased and things like that. and painting a rosy picture of Ottoman society. So this is from André Clos, yeah, the book Suleiman the Magnificent. He said in there, Ottoman occupation had improved the lot of people hitherto subject to Christian feudal lords. So he's talking about the Ottoman expansion into Eastern Europe, right? The Ottoman expansion into Eastern Europe. He's saying under the Ottomans, the Christian peasants were much better off than they were, because before that they were under feudalism and under that sort of oppressive system, right? The Turkish, whoever lived under the Ottoman, he was a free man, quite different from that of the serfs of Western Europe, is according to André Clos. The peasant's holding could not be taken away from him. He owns his land. And he could sell his land and go wherever he wants, as long as he has permission from the government. Remember, the Ottomans are obsessed with the bureaucracy, right? Like today, if you want to sell your house, you have to tick a few boxes, pay the stamp duty, etc. So the lord, the landlord, the Sapahi, the only thing they have over the peasants is they collect the taxes. They have no other power over the peasants. They're free men and women. They can collect the tax, and even the tax is fixed by the central Ottoman state. The landlord can't just arbitrarily ask for higher taxes or things like that. The taxes are set from the central Ottoman authority to make sure that the peasants are not overburdened. So if you're a typical peasant, so remember we said over 90% of pre-industrial societies, they're always peasants, farmers that live in little villages and they have farms. Right? What was your life like if you're a peasant, a farmer in the Ottoman village? There's André Clos, he describes the village life. He said your house would probably be made from earth or straw. Yeah, and in your house, it will be a small house, just one room, maybe a curtain to make it into two separate rooms, yeah? And you would have carpet made of goat hair or felt. And you might have a separating for the women's side, yeah, from the main room. Next to the house, you probably would have a cow shed for the animals. And the reason why it's close to the house, because the warmth from the animals is helpful in the cold times. Inside your house, you would have a cauldron above the fire. I think, I'm not sure if people watch Osman, they may have this, or I don't know how accurate. I think they've done it quite accurately, which is quite good, the way they've reproduced the camps and things. And you're going to be burning fuel, like manure or straw. You will have no furniture. It's an interesting thing about Muslims, even the rich Muslims. Throughout history, Muslims always had... they sat on the floor and they slept on the floor, obviously on cushions, and they had like beds, but beds that were towards the floor. So this is a Western thing where you have chairs and tables and things like this. The people in the villages, they would have many religious festivals, like we've got Eid coming up. But they would have, many different festivals, not just the two Eid. There was a funny story. I was in a masjid once, Algerian masjid, and there was this Salafi guy, right? And there was a Pakistani brother who was talking to him. I think he was really trying to wind him up. So the Pakistani brother was saying, yeah, brother, in Pakistan we have got 5 Eids. Right? We've got 5 Eids. And the Salafi brother was saying, Astaghfirullah, it's like a bid'ah, like... I don't know why he was... Because we have Eid Milad al Nabi, and I think there's a few other things. I don't know what they have in Pakistan, but in traditional in the Ottoman, if you were a villager, there would be many religious festivals. Apart from the 2 Eids, there would be other things, celebrations. If there's a new sultan, or the sultan's had a kid, all sort of celebrations and things. You have fairs. The fairs would normally be in the local town, so the villagers would go to the local town to participate in the fairs, take your children to have fun. And you may have visiting musicians, poets, storytellers, and so on. And we mentioned about the Sufi brotherhoods are pervasive, so even among the villages, you will have the Sufi brotherhoods at this time. There were many Christian and Jewish communities living in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans gave them full autonomy to live according to their own laws and customs, and even go to their own judges. And this is the same from throughout Muslim history. Wherever Muslims went, these communities have got their own autonomy as long as they paid their tax to the Sultan, the jizya, and also they're not obliged to fight in the army of the Muslims either. Um, Many Muslims are surprised, even they're allowed to eat pork and even have wine, drink wine in their own communities. The Muslims never stop them. It's not part of Islamic law that you have to stop them from doing that. Some people, I think nowadays, especially in our Pakistani tradition, people think that the pig is like it's like shaitan or something. Like you can't even mention the name, and probably something will happen if you say the name. You might blow up in fire or something. I remember there were some people that attacked a mosque once. They were throwing a pig's head into the mosque, like something going to happen to the Muslims. They're all going to die or something if they see the pig's head. But yeah. So the Ottoman cities, where they built a new city, they would build it according to a very strict plan. The main masjid is always in the center of the town or city. And then around the masjid you have the bazaar, the different souks. And each souk is arranged to a certain pattern as well, certain very specific hierarchy. So there's certain trades that are considered more noble, they're put closer to the masjid. So things like perfume selling, gold, these things are put closer to the masjid. And trades that are considered less noble, or things like that may not smell nice and things like that, they're put further away from the masjid. And then of course you have the baths. Remember, the Muslim, they love their baths, those hammams. So the Ottomans also loved their hammams. Even it's famous even till now. People, you go to the Ottoman hammam. And then further out in the city, you have the residential districts, and you have the more wealthy people have houses with gardens. Normally, the gardens were inside the building, open space inside, like a courtyard. And then you have the poorer people with the smaller houses and so on. And outside of the city, you have the burial. You normally have the graveyards outside the city, and also the grazing areas for animals and things like that. We already talked about the guilds, okay? The janissaries were used to police the medium and large towns, and the small towns, just the local sipahi would be enough to police. And the markets, you always have inspectors. This is a sunnah. This is started by the Prophet ﷺ, to send inspector for the markets to make sure that the trading is happening according to law and order. No one's cheating and things like that. The Turks were very famous for their ceramics. Yeah, it's been described as the Turkish art par excellence. So many, ceramic tiles. Once again, possibly inherited from the Romans. Arts and culture. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but there was a lot of paintings. The Muslims would do miniatures because it was like a Sharia thing. We can't draw living creatures, or that's why often you see the Mughal and the Ottoman, they're miniature pictures, because this was like a loophole in the Sharia. If it's a very small image, it's not considered haram. So until no one knows what any of the Abbasid Khalifas looked like. There's no pictures, no paintings. You don't know any of the Ottoman, any of the Umayyad. We don't know what they look like. Because there was a very strict prohibition. Muslims, they don't paint picture. This is a recent thing. Some of the Ottomans, they did have their thing painted, but this is why we're coming to the end of the Islamic age now. Yeah, the Mughals were trying to get around by doing miniature painting, just doing miniatures. So you're not really breaking the Sharia technically, but you have all these miniatures, yeah. But then some of the Ottomans did get their portraits done by some of the European painters from across the Mediterranean. Calligraphy is obviously very, Turks are even till today known, so the Ottomans had a very advanced art of calligraphy. Some of the one of the great masters there. Weaving and tapestry, yeah, Turkish carpets. It's interesting, Cardinal Wolsey. Yeah, so this is how we're saying the Western Europeans, they're very much aware of what's happening with the Ottomans. He orders 60 carpets, Turkish carpets. Yeah, he wants them because they're the best carpets, much better than anything you can get in Europe. You see what I'm saying about the interaction with them? Literary, we haven't got time to talk about the literary arts, the poetry, and all of these. So this was a period of intellectual and cultural fluorescence again, in the Muslim world under the Ottomans and the Mughals and the Safavids. The madrasa system was very well developed by this time in the Ottomans. Madrasa students were totally free of charge. Remember we talked about the awqaf. There are so many religious endowments. So if you're a student, all of your studies are free of charge from beginning to end. Over 100 madrasas in Constantinople alone during Suleiman's time. So education is highly valued. I think one of the nice things that Andre Clos also mentions, which is also something that I talk about, is if you look at Muslim architecture, where's the Abbasid palaces? Where's the Ottoman palaces? Where's the Mughal? One of the things with the Muslims, they didn't build massive palaces, but they built massive masjids. And that was part of the culture once again. Even if you're a sultan or a Mughal emperor or whatever you are, you're still surrounded by these Sufi sheikhs, the culture, Sufi poetry. You're still very aware of the fact that your life in this world is very temporary. And you're very aware of the akhirah. These are Muslims, So they would put their money and their best efforts to build massive masjids, beautiful masjids. And the palaces are very low key, The palaces are amazing inside, but from outside there's nothing amazing in the palaces, Inside they're full of luxury and wealth and everything. But from the outside, if you look at the Muslim, they don't have, they didn't build these dazzling palaces, what the Europeans were starting to do. Because they would rather build dazzling masjids. And even these non-Muslims have picked up on this, He said, you can search in vain for any palaces or edifices which do not have a utilitarian or religious function. Nothing to compare with the palaces of Western Europe. Because they believe in the transitoriness of this world, This is the whole culture they're in. Even if you look at the Mughal great emperors, they're so close to the Sufi sheikhs and the Sufi poetry and things like that, But he says, but what mosques they built. So the greatest architect of the age was Sinan Pasha. You might have heard of him. He was the architect of Suleiman the Magnificent. Now Sinan Pasha has built these amazing masjids. Some of you may have been to Istanbul. You've seen them, right? This is the Shehzadiyeh in Constantinople. Some of you may have visited. And this is the Suleimaniyeh in Constantinople. Now, the greatest work, however, he did is outside Constantinople, and many people don't realize it. We go to Constantinople, we visit, but we don't go to see his greatest masterpiece, which is in Edirne, which is a town outside of Constantinople. Yeah, my slideshow's going crazy by itself. The Salimiyeh. The Salimiyeh is his greatest work, according to him himself, and according to other experts that You know, so this was his masterpiece. So for people who do go to visit Turkey, bear in mind if you can make the visit to Aden and see his great masterpiece Salimiyya, is named after the Sultan Saleem. The other one of the masjid, I think it was this one, the Sulaymaniya, is quite similar to the Hagia Sophia. And they said that he said he did that to prove that he can do what the Greeks did but better. So the Hagia Sophia is a Greek building, from ancient times. And he built, I think it's the Sulaymaniya, which is very similar in design to the Hagia Sophia, but he wanted to beat the Greeks at their own work. And then just to finish, we have the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal is built by some of the students of Sinan Pasha, or student of their student. These Turkish architects have, the Mughals have also been calling them, to come and build stuff. So the Taj Mahal is built by one of these Turkish masters, by the Emperor Shah Jahan, isn't it? Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal. And until today, the Taj Mahal is considered to be the greatest architectural work on the planet today by many people. Yeah, the greatest piece of architecture today. Sadly, neglected once again because we've got Hindu nationalists there in India who don't want to be highlighting Muslim history of India. But this is probably the greatest one single building in the world today. May Allah give us the tawfiq to see it one day, inshallah. Okay, so that's the end for today, and then what we'll do is we'll take some questions. And does Hadra have its origin in Ottoman military training? Interesting question. I don't know. I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. The Hadra, which is like a type of dhikr that is done with a type of dancing, I guess you have to call it, really. I think this came about, and the Shadhalis are famous for this. Shadhali. I studied in Syria. There's many Shadhali tariqa in Syria. So even till today, in the masjids in Syria, some of the masjids after Jummah, they will all get together and do a Hadra. So they do dhikr with inshad, and then they do, rocking back and forth. I don't think it's linked to Ottoman military training, as far as I know, but there's probably different ones. Did Thomas Aquinas have any impact on Muslims? No, I don't think Thomas Aquinas had any impact on Muslims, but I think Muslims had impact on Thomas Aquinas. I don't know if this has been revealed as such, but we talk about the Averroist movement, which was before Thomas Aquinas's. So Thomas Aquinas is associated with medieval scholasticism, which is the type of the Roman Catholic Church trying to put their beliefs on a rational basis. I think this has definitely come from the Muslim world because it's identical to what the Muslim theologians had been doing for quite a long time. And you had the books of Averroes being translated in Europe, right? So definitely the Europeans were aware of that teaching. So it's the other way around. Yeah, the Muslims had influence on him, although it may not have been revealed. Yeah.
The Mughals, were they light-skinned, blue-eyed people?
Mughal?
Yeah.
I don't think so. No.
No.
The Babur came from the steppe. So they're from they're from Mongolian descent. The Mongolian descent.
There's one thing I'm noticing.
Yeah.
Africans, Indians, Aborigines, they were all quite happy living by themselves in their own little villages, little communities.
Yeah.
While white people, and I'm not trying to be racist, but white people, when they saw an opportunity, they would just destroy a people and then overwhelm them and then, make them subservient to that people. When brown people or African people were quite happy in their villages, living in their little communities, just being happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. I mean, we're going to probably talk about it tomorrow a little bit, but there is a big discussion about why is it that Europeans literally spread around the whole world. After this, in the next period that we're going to talk about tomorrow, the European colonialists literally spread throughout the whole world. So, like the Chinese never did that, for example. The Chinese were happy to build a wall and say that we've got China, we've got the Himalayas, we've got the wall, the Great Wall. We're happy to stay within these confines of this empire. Um, so I think there's an interesting, this long discussion to be had about that whole idea. I think it definitely wouldn't be fair to say that the Europeans are the only people that have conquered other people. There have been conquerors throughout history, that have gone out and conquered other lands, and that's just a normal. But for some, it seems the Europeans maybe have been unique in like the whole world. They literally covered the whole world, and I think personally, if you look at it, it's a lot of it is driven by capitalism. This is what I've hinted at as well. Capitalism is a unique type of greed, really. You know, obviously people define capitalism in different ways, but one of the main scholars of capitalism, Emmanuel Wallerstein, he says to sum it up, capitalism is an endless accumulation of money or wealth or capital, endless accumulation. So they want to get more and more, money, wealth, more and more. So if you look at a lot of the expansion of the European people, it's not driven by they want to conquer or they want to take, like some people, they want to spread their teachings or religious teaching. It's all driven by money. They don't really care if they put the Union Jack, as long as they're getting them extracting the wealth from that land. So later on, they develop a lot of strategies to you keep the person in place like a puppet ruler, but as long as you can extract the wealth and do the so-called trade, that's what they're interested in, making money out of those places. So yeah, it's a type of facade that is driven by greed. It's all about making money. It's money, money, money. One of our scholars back in the day, he said they've got a religion about money, and their shahada is la ilaha illa dollar. And I think their salah, 5 daily salah, is going to the shopping malls. So don't go to masjid, go to the shopping mall. Anyway, so last question: what is the difference between living in the Ottoman and in a Muslim country today? Massive difference. So all of the history we looked at so far is pre-industrial, pre-modern life, right? Vast majority of people are farmers. They live in villages. Even if you live in a town or city, you've got none of this modern technology. You've got no communication. You haven't got really fast travel. If you live in a town, you probably don't know what's happening in the next town because takes a few days to travel to the next town, right? So only when people are traveling past, they bring you news of what's going on in other places around the world. That's why people are always so eager for travelers to come through, because they can get the news. What's happening in Baghdad? What's happening here? No one knows. You're just living your own isolated life, like the brother was saying. You're happy. What is happiness? We talked about that yesterday. Yeah? So life is very, very different before modernity comes in and all of this modern technology. We'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. So tomorrow will be the last session, inshallah. So we're going to talk about the European age and modernity and the modern age and all of these things. So hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow. And I was very happy. My daughters came yesterday and they told me there's some sisters here that attended the history course that I did in High Wycombe a few years ago. So I'm glad the sisters are attending as well that came to the history course. And some of the brothers that also came to the history course. So you're keeping up your history studies, inshallah. So yeah, please do write down any questions as well if you have any. Any other quick questions should we wind up? I can see people are getting very tired.
Where do you write the questions down? Where do you write the questions down?
When? Where? You can ask. You can just ask. Don't worry, you don't need to write it down.
So when
Muslims were seeing this progress from the West in their sciences and in their technology, and obviously the Muslim empires were still far stronger at the time, and they had significantly more resources. Was there a recognition of that? Did they then think, and if there was there an idea or a plan to kind of counter that, or to kind of improve above and beyond what the West was doing?
Yeah, good question. It's a question that most people often think about, like why did Muslims decline and why couldn't they catch up with the West and these type of things, in the scientific advancements. I mean, the period we're talking about, I don't think the Muslims had really realized what was happening in Western Europe so much, because you still got, this is the time of Aurangzeb, and the Muslims are at the height of their power still in some ways, in this gunpowder period. They are noticing the Europeans now, on the edges, like we said. They're sort of noticing their ships, sailing around and causing a little bit of problems and things like that. The Spanish silver, there's so much silver coming into Spain, they now believe that it basically destabilized the economy of the whole world, not just Europe, Western Europe. So they believe that the whole world supply of silver was tripled by the silver that was brought into Spain from America. There's a massive influx of raw silver wealth, that's coming from these lands. But I don't think at this stage, I don't think the Muslims are really thinking of the Western Europeans as much of a threat at all. But it's only in the next century, the 18th century, where you start getting the East India Company in India start taking land, and they start basically being taken seriously. So what do the Muslims do? The Muslims are in quite a state of decline, really, by this stage, I guess. The Ottomans the Ottomans are the closest to Europeans, remember? They're on the borders, that's their neighbors. Ottomans are considered part of Europe, in fact. So the Ottomans are the ones that really do try to keep up with the advancements in the West, So you have the Tanzimat reforms and things like that, That one of the Ottoman sultans, he tries to make these reforms to even the way the society, the government, because people are looking at Western Europe, not just the science, but they're thinking, what's happening? Why are these guys, going so ahead? So you start trying to think about how do they govern, their way of government and all that other stuff as well. So they're making reforms. Yeah, then much later on, there's efforts from people like Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Rida, these what we call modernists, but they're Islamic scholars, but they've studied in the West, and they're saying, look, we need to take the science, we need to benefit from some of the learning from the West. Because some of the Muslim scholars, they took a very other approach that we don't want nothing to do with the West. I think the scholars of Deoband are probably famous for that, So their reaction to the West was just close the doors. That's why they're very strict, that you cannot dress in Western clothing. You can't, so they didn't want nothing to do with the language, the English language. But there were certain other scholars that were saying, no, look, we need to study what these guys are studying. We need to catch up with their science. There's a lot of good as well. It's not all, wrong. So there was these different type of reactions in the Muslim world to what was going on, really.
If Sufi tariqas were such a big thing in the Ottoman age and that sort of stuff, why did it have such a bad reputation and rap nowadays?
Okay, good question. Yeah, one of the big attacks against Sufi tariqas came from this guy called Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. He was an Arabian from the Najd. We're going to talk about him a little bit next time, but as you brought it up, inshallah. And once again, he started a movement. He was a Khawarij, like he was a Takfiri, very much on the model of the Khawarij movements that we talked about before. So he basically came with a very strict interpretation of Islam, saying that, he basically started saying that all Muslims are committing shirk and they're worshipping graves. And one of his main attacks was against the Sufis. He said the Sufi tariqah, these people, they go to graves, they worship the graves, and things like that. But he went to such an extreme that he said, for example, he said the Ottoman Empire, he said, there's people that go to worship graves, so they're grave worshippers, they're all mushriks. But he said anyone who lives in that place, even if they don't do it themselves, they're also a kafir. Why? Because it's obligatory upon them to speak out against the grave worship, what he called grave worship. So even if you don't do it yourself, even if you just live in that land, but you don't openly condemn it, that makes you a kafir as well. So he basically made takfir of the entire Ottoman Empire and every Muslim living there. And that's why, eventually they fought against the Ottomans and things like that. So I think this is it's a long history. I've actually published a book which I go through the history of this movement, the Wahhabi movement. But they rise to power 3 times. They come to power in Arabia. Yeah, the first time is under the sort of followers of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. Has actually died, but his sons and direct descendants, they seized power from the Ottomans. Then eventually the Ottomans crushed them. They sent one of their generals from Egypt. They crushed them, and they nearly wiped out. But some of them survive back in the Najd again. In the desert, they go back into the deep desert, and they sort of survive. The teaching survives. The Wahhabi teaching. And then about a century later, they managed to seize power again the second time. But this time it's only a small area of the Najd. And then they're defeated again by another rival tribe. And the third time they come to power is when the Ottomans are defeated in World War One. In World War One, the Ottoman Empire went in on the World War One on the side of Germany. And Germany was defeated, the Ottomans were defeated in World War One, right? So the Ottoman Empire is now collapsed. So then the Saudi tribe from the Najd, they see the opportunity, they seize power again. This is the third time, and this is under the King Abdul Aziz, which is the beginning of the current Saudi monarchy. So he's the one who then calls it the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yeah? Now, this king, they're still very closely connected to the Wahhabi scholars. So since the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the Saudi tribe have been very closely linked to the Wahhabi family. Yeah, they call it Ali Shaykh. The Ali Shaykh are the family of the Wahhabi scholars that go back to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and the Saudis are the tribal leaders. So they're very closely connected. So when you have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they're now this Wahhabi Islam, which is a Khawarij Islam. So I personally consider it to be a Khariji state, a Kharijite state. And they basically, over the next 50, 60, 70 years, they discover oil, first of all. So they become immensely wealthy. Yeah? When the Saudi family first come to power, they don't know about oil. But they soon discover oil, large amounts of oil. They become immensely wealthy. And they use that money to propagate the Saudi teachings, the Wahhabi teachings, right? And they put a lot of money into that. It's very little money compared to what they have, but it's a lot of money. So in every single Muslim country around the world, you will have Saudi-funded institutions, whether it's masjids or schools. They were putting money, they were giving money, they were taking students from every Muslim country, paying them scholarships, fully funded. You come to Saudi, you study at Medina University, you learn the Saudi Wahhabi Islam, you go back to your countries. So you can see over decades, this is having a massive effect on the Muslim world. I mean, I remember when I first started studying Islam, there were some brothers in our community, they were going to Medina University as well. And they were saying to me, brother, you should come and study there, right? So you get free plane tickets, I think 2-3 times a year to go back to your family. But I always remember this, the brother saying, the best thing, brother, every Jummah, they give you a roasted lamb, a nice juicy roast lamb, for the students to eat. So it was well funded. You know, it's very tempting for a student of Islam to get there, free everything, accommodation, food. Alhamdulillah, you know, Allah, I believe, you know, Allah gave me the blessing of studying with certain people here, or, you know, they said, no, no, no. You know, I was aware of that Saudi Salafi thing, so I went to Sham, to Syria, where, Alhamdulillah, a lot of people like myself went to Syria, but we were living without anything, you know. Alhamdulillah, I consider myself, Allah helped me with some money because I had my doctorate degree, so I was able to do some locum work and get fund myself. But there were other students there that were living so in such difficult situations, you know. Probably, I'm sure some of you know Sheikh Thaqib, right? He's a good friend of mine. We studied together in Syria. He was living like up the mountain, you know, where the houses are very cheap up the mountain. So I always remember once I went to visit him slightly up the mountain, and it was him and another brother from a couple of brothers living in this flat with very very cheap, very nothing there. You know, they didn't have any heating, so I went in and he's sitting inside with like about 5 layers of blankets. It was very cold, but they didn't have any heating. You know, so he's got about 5 layers of blankets trying to read his book. And it was Sheikh Amjad. He was living with Sheikh Amjad. Sheikh Saleh knows them. And they used to make this tuna curry, which I don't recommend ever anyone to eat. They would make this big curry, you know. Then they used to, or sometimes they used to buy vegetable, put and make a big curry. The Sheikh Amjad, he taught Sheikh Thaqib how to make curry for the first time. They used to make a big curry so they can eat it for like 2 weeks, you know, with the cheap khubas they have. So I said to them, "What's the vegetable in the curry?" They said, "We don't know. We just bought it from the souk, you know. It looked like a nice vegetable, so you put it in there." You know? So I didn't join them for the meal, but I actually bought them a heater the next day. You know, I bought an electric heater, cost like probably 51 pound or something. So I bought them an electric heater and gave it. I felt sorry for the brothers, mashallah. But people went through a lot of struggle, you know, for studying Islam. But I forgot what was the question. What were we talking about? What was the question? Oh, the Wahhabi, yeah. So this is why, really, because the Wahhabi teaching has spread so much, especially in the Arab world. In the Arab world, I think it's very, very strong, you know, influence. Even the people that might not be Salafi or Wahhabis, but they're influenced a lot by that teaching. In India, Pakistan, Turkey, it's been more protected because you had more sort of ulama that were able to, you know, refute those things. And many of the Sunni ulama, they wrote many refutation, even from the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab until now. There's been many books written on this subject, you know. But especially in the Arab world, I think it's very influential. Sheikh Saleh, say something about this. This is your field of speciality. I ask Sheikh Saleh, he knows more about these guys. Because he used to debate with them a lot, isn't it? Alhamdulillah. I was more debating with the Hizb ut-Tahrir and people like that, and Sheikh Saleh and Sheikh Jawad, they were debating with these Salafis a lot.